Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Economists in South Africa have been working to quantify the cost of load shedding to the economy. They estimated that rolling blackouts impact the GDP by up to 10% at 500 million rands per stage per day. Joining us now to put the numbers into perspective is Dr. Francois Stofberg, a senior economist at the Efficient Group. Dr. Francois, good evening and thank you very much for your time. Now, last year, you did kind of punch the numbers and look at the figures and what it means to be load shedding, even maybe at a stage 6. Have you found that you've had to update those figures?
Yeah, well, that's usually how it works. Is from time to time you just have to relook the figures with some more relevant data. Initially, we found that, as you correctly said, that the impact was maybe a little bit less, between 7 to 9% as a total of our GDP. But the first time we ran the analysis was, I think, way back in 2015. And since then, the rate of deterioration has decreased because, luckily, consumers and businesses has gotten a little bit smarter. So we've been able to substitute, work from home now even, where we have these UPSs keeping everything alive and going. So luckily, consumers and businesses are a bit smarter. So the cost of load shedding has been alleviated to a certain extent. But the problem with costs like these is that they compound over time if they're not solved. And that's the problem that we're sitting in now, is that even though businesses and consumers are smart, that 7 to 9% has probably gone up to between 10 and 13% of GDP, which is a massive figure if you consider South Africa's economy is about 4.6 trillion rand. So we're talking here about 500 billion rands, that the economy could have been larger, and it translates to about 1 million more jobs we could have had if Eskom could just be doing their job, and that's keeping the lights on.
Yeah. Does it matter at what stage we are in, whether it's stage 2, whether it's stage 4, whether it's stage 6, in terms of the impact?
Definitely so. And it's not just about the hours, it's about the cost of those hours. I think for 2 hours, usually a UPS or an external power supply can keep you going for 2-3 hours, but these 4 hours load shedding really is becoming very costly. We have some businesses, of course, running generators, and now, of course, with petrol price or diesel price absolutely exploding over the last couple of years, that's becoming ever more expensive. And the problem also with these longer hours is the impact that it has on buying patterns. It's something that we see, and also the what do you call it, the inefficiencies and the trouble that it causes. Just think about a 2-hour traffic now becoming a 4-hour traffic problem. And that builds up, and that means you're delayed, that means you're discouraged and disgruntled, that means you stop working as hard, as proficiently, and the roll-on effect, the second and third round price effects, then compound quite quickly, and that's very deteriorating towards our economic output.
Yeah. The assumption is that big factories and big conglomerates are large enough to be able to afford a generator, and therefore they are largely not hugely impacted by this load shedding. How true is that, and how significant is the fact that then it's the smaller businesses that get impacted?
Well, partially true. I think the whole story about the emerging market world, and especially South Africa, is the ease of doing business. Now, if the ease of doing business gets worse and worse, then you don't want to do business in a country like South Africa. So I understand that they might have the resources to do so, but we've heard from large companies and corporations, and even from smaller companies, is that the problem is the same, is that can I do business or can I not do business, and to which extent can I do business, and am I supported, not just by the power, but of course legislation, policy, etc. So a factor like this, yes, I do have money, I can work it into my income statement to see if it still makes cost sense, but it's really not good just from a cost of doing business perspective, as an ease of doing business perspective. When entrepreneurs, which we work with quite closely, have to make a decision, do they want to broaden out their offering in South Africa, or are they looking elsewhere? And that's what we've seen actually since 2015-16, is where businesses have to decide where they want to open a headquarter, where they want to open manufacturing. They've now looked at other countries, Slovenia, Nairobi, one of the African countries, cities in an African country around Africa. So they are looking to these alternatives because because of load shedding to a large extent, and because of some of the other difficult things making it difficult to do business in South Africa.
Yeah. Are there industries that do well during load shedding? For example, like the insurance business, maybe, do they do well during load shedding?
Yeah, I don't think there's any specific industry that does well, more so necessarily than another industry. You can see that some consumer preferences change during load shedding, that I prefer a place that has electricity over a place that does not have electricity, but it's not a clear cut. Yes, when there's not energy around, then I start leisuring more, or when there's not electricity, then I start scrolling on social media a bit more. So there's no clear cut, yes, one industry does better than another. Like we usually see in a downturn, in an economic downturn, we do see a shift from the more luxurious living, luxurious goods, durable goods, towards the DIYs, towards pets and pet stuffs as an example. But there's not an example in this case where the lights go off, or where I have a lack of electricity, where I substitute then for something else necessarily.
Yeah. As far as the cost itself of then producing electricity for Eskom, because during load shedding, they are also burning a lot of diesel, so it becomes a little bit expensive for them to produce this electricity. Does that get passed on sometime into the cost of living and other costs as well that affect the consumers later on?
Very good question, and absolutely yes, it does get passed on. Statistics South Africa last month reported that on average over the last year, tariffs went up 14.4% for consumers. That's huge. I mean, inflation is 6%, so that's more than double, almost triple what our standard cost of increase or cost of price increases is in South Africa. So yes, it does get passed on, and that's once again the problem with inefficiencies, is that they compound. So it gets worse and worse, because what started off with just being load shedding 2 hours, now we're in 4 hours, multiple times a day. And then what started out with only being load shedding, now they want to bring in diesel generators to try and save that, and then it's 4 hours, and then it's more diesel. So yeah, the problem keeps on compounding. So definitely, and unfortunately, you might not know this, but for a long time, the price increases of electricity, as an example, were kept lower than they should have been. Research was actually done to prove that. And then as a result of that, Eskom had to start increasing more rapidly. And then they also fell into this problem, as you correctly say, that they now have the diesel and everything else. So they had to increase their prices even more. And I'm afraid we're stuck in this environment where they kind of have to increase rates between 12 and 18% just to remain viable. So now what's happening is we end up paying for something that we're not getting. We end up paying for it even more. Consumers become disgruntled. Then they don't want to pay. So Eskom is in a real tough position right now to keep consumers happy, to keep the guys that are paying them, keeping the lights on, happy, but they're finding it even more difficult to do so.
Yeah. Do we ever calculate, I suppose, the time it takes for us to recover? I mean, we take it for granted that, yes, we'll be off maybe for a week. It's not as if companies immediately bounce back as soon as the lights come on. It takes a little bit of time. What's the lag time for companies to bounce back?
Very clever question. And it does depend industry to industry. The guys that are most negatively impacted by this are the manufacturing and mining industries. Some of the manufacturing, the boilers, boiler makers, and some of those large factories that are very dependent on warming up of certain materials. Those thermal cookers, as an example, they take between 10 and 12 hours to get to peak capacity. So if they have an interruption, which is unplanned or too long, or the power does get cut off at a time it wasn't supposed to cut off, they basically lose a day, and sometimes even 2 days. Now what happens, especially in these aluminium smelters, and I understand, yes, there's gas and oil and everything else, but there are still aluminium and other smelters that use electricity, and if those materials get stuck, that's dirty. That's very dirty business and very costly business. So yes, in certain industries, the lag time is very big. If you lose a day or two, if something goes wrong, 3 days, possibly even a week. If something goes wrong in a mine, even more. Yes, they have generators, I understand that. But sometimes in these unplanned circumstances, the worst does happen. Now, in other industries like finance, which is a very large contributor to our economy, and some of the other services, the delay isn't as big. I can work on my laptop and then work on the work computer where there is electricity. I can move around, so it's a bit easier. But for services, retail sector as a good example, very easy to switch back on again. So it does differ sector to sector, but I think just in broad, the cost to the economy, this 10% that we referred to in the beginning, making that up, getting that back into the economy is now near impossible. That 500 billion we should basically write off now. To make that back, we should start producing now at 120, 130%. And with the structural inefficiencies that we have in our economy, basically impossible.
Goodness. Wow.
Yeah. Sorry.
It paints a rough picture there. Dr. Stofberg, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Dr. Francois Stofberg is senior economist at Efficient Group there. Looking at those numbers and the picture that comes up looks rather grim.